I was just thinking about you. Those Islander tickets, right?
How about this humidity?
So is Florida.
Hot and sticky, like my balls.
Phil may well be the most misrepresented character in The Sopranos. He entered prison with a certain reputation. He came out and ultimately ran the biggest crime syndicate on the East Coast. Yet, in all likelihood, this isn't a fact which gets any substantial attention in many of the media outlets covering this series. Just another background detail for someone who is essentially the volatile and uncontrollable New York mobster Tony must deal with during his final few years. Except for one thing, Phil didn't emerge from those 20 years in prison with a reputation. He emerged with a mind and with even more cunning than before. Because if you look carefully at how Phil operates throughout the entire series, you'll see something else. Phil wasn't the simple-minded brute the show made him out to be. He was perhaps the most calculating individual in the entire series. But it wasn't about that at all, not even remotely. It began in 1980. That was when Phil was incarcerated on charges of racketeering. For 20 years, he sat in a federal prison, and the outside world kept turning and kept moving without him. Now, the outside world moved without him, and while he was sitting in jail, other people rose through the ranks, people he had once associated with. Some people became powerful, some died, and some got promoted. And by the time Phil came out of prison, his friends had either died, been executed, or were running their own show without him. This is what generally happens to someone who goes into jail under such circumstances and comes out decades later. They lose status, influence, power, and hierarchy and have to prove their relevancy again and again. But that's not what happened to Phil, because here's something that most people don't realize about the 2 decades in question. Phil didn't use them to grow bitter at all. He used them to become convinced of his own beliefs. There's an important difference between the two. When he emerged from there, Phil had absolutely no delusions regarding what that life entailed, how much it had taken from him, and what it demanded in return. And the answer that he reached was the fact that the only thing that counted in that world was respect. Phil had seen with his own eyes how the New Jersey mob had earned the former without ever truly gaining the latter. This was Phil's silent grudge. It wasn't that simple for Phil to walk out of prison and immediately start running the show. Phil came back to a Leotardo family led by John Sacramone, whose role Phil would play over many years to come. He wasn't quite close enough to make any decisions, but near enough to have his finger on every pulse going. But look at Phil during this era. He isn't showing impatience, and he's not attempting to undermine Sacramone. Whenever Tony Soprano came to the negotiating table during these years, he brought the same situation, the same game being played out. New Jersey putting pressure on New York to give some ground. The thing was, Phil had already accomplished the most difficult feat for any man like him. He had remained in prison for 2 decades and hadn't been cracked yet. Waiting for a few more years before grabbing the appropriate spot wasn't running out of patience. It was simply developing the same patience he had from 1980. Oh, and also, if you are enjoying this video, make sure to subscribe because I upload weekly videos just like this, so please subscribe. Phil's grievance was not vocal, which is why we often miss it. It manifests itself through how Phil interacts with New Jersey. The lack of respect and the polite attitude that is more menacing than anything else. Tony never actually noticed this. That changes after Billy is killed, Phil's brother. There comes a point where everything that has made Phil cold for many years disappears. The show provides us with the chance of witnessing the inner workings of Phil's heart for the first time, because his reaction is not that of grieving, but of clarity. His response is immediate, and there is no room left for confusion. His feelings are real but sharp, and he knows exactly what the gripe from 1980 looks like now. Vito's case is no exception either. In the case of Vito, it's not only Vito whom Phil responds to negatively, it is Vito's symbolic meaning. A mess that originated from New Jersey, seeped to New York's affairs, and Tony wanting Phil to take the heat for it. Yet another file. Another example of how New Jersey expects accommodation but not respect. Here's where the conversational statement works or fails. If Phil is indeed the most calculating character in the series, then whatever happens after he gets the seat must owe entirely to the guy who got out of jail in 1980. Not even one surprise. Definitely no Phil. Phil. Look at what Phil does, because he doesn't celebrate, he doesn't revel in it, and he just sits there and manages the family how he'd apparently always planned to do it. Somewhere along the line, Phil must have decided not to call it personal. That's the trick. He had 20 years of pent-up frustration towards the New Jersey of all of the insults and disdain they had been putting him through, and he transformed all of that into a business issue. The organization was vulnerable, and they were due for a correction. That's how Phil spun it to himself, even. Except when you look at the actions he takes once the war starts, you look at how those decisions are timed, how specific their targets are, and whom he chooses to punish and how. None of it is purely strategic in nature. It was only when Phil realized that his personal resentment called for an organizational scale retaliation that he spun it into a business strategy. Tony saw a competitor, but Tony never saw the man that competitor was. In many ways, that prison remained part of him till the day he died, giving him confidence, patience, and bitterness that Tony never realized. By the time he got close enough to understand, it was already too late.